what if a figure identified with the Liberal Party was to threaten to break an ABC presenter's nose?
Well, exactly.
As Bob Ellis did this week when he wrote a post literally titled "Breaking Fran Kelly's Nose," because again he disagreed with her over polling. I think
polling again.
You've got to look at his issues with polling.
Fran's not reckoning Labor's got 70% primer in the bag.
Well, yeah, obviously she deserves to have her nose broken.
Don't we all?
Which would be a lot of my readers were quick to send in messages saying, in that contest I'd back Fran.
Yes, it's probably got a good left hook.
Yeah, well, I think she'd be able to cope with Bob's, advances, if you were to use the term. But, considering that Bob's stomach went into the ring around about 2 hours before Bob himself, Fran would have a bit of an advantage.
Yeah, well, it'd be sort of bantamweight v super heavyweight, wouldn't it?
Yeah, not exactly Rocky, more blonde.
Very good. That's next week's column, okay? But then of course we get to this Ashraf character. I don't know who he is, but he's associated with the Labor Party, isn't he?
Well associated. He's a fan. He's a true believer. His website links to a true believer website, so I think we can put him in that category.
Okay.
But again, this is a chap who's very much a Labor supporter, very enthusiastic towards the Labor cause. He's a part-time actor, if his online CV is accurate.
Most actors are part-time, I found.
Exactly. I think the part-time aspect of it is pretty large in his case. But, that's fine. Everyone's got to follow their dream. But he does get very aggressive online. Again, it's people who are tending to sort of lose it as the election goes on. And he's ended up writing some things which, again, aren't really repeatable on public airways, but it's just
it's something disgusting about Abbott's daughters, isn't it, really?
Yes, exactly. And, you don't... I'm not sure how these people think when they write these things. Do they think they're advancing their cause by giving the likes of me ammunition against them? Do they ever think one step ahead of their argument and imagine how it could be used against them?
I don't.
Well, basic.
I doubt they do not think one step ahead, because it sounds as though and reads as though they don't even think when they do the initial movement. But
it might be briefly satisfying for these people to lash out,
cathartic,
in obscene ways and abusive ways. It might be very sort of exactly. It might be a moment of catharsis for them.
Yeah. I don't know. I went to watch Freud's last session last week or the week before. It's quite interesting, but I think we could have a sequel if we put a few of these in the room.
We could have a conference.
Freud's last teleconference.
But do they ever think that the momentary satisfaction they might get by lashing out like this is more than erased by the return of serve from people who criticise them in response? It doesn't say a lot about their processes or their political strategy.
Well, it certainly doesn't bode well for their public intellectual name tag. But you make a very good point. You say, look, if the polls get worse than they presently are, imagine how unhinged the commentary could be. Well, as I said today, I mean, there's news polls all over the place. There's Fairfax, Nielsen polls, everything else. But today the Nielsen poll's out, and again, it's bad news. It's now 53-47 to the coalition. Well, maybe we ain't seen nothing yet.
We might be looking at, I think the last big left-wing meltdown followed Mark Latham's defeat against John Howard. And a lot of people anticipated a Latham victory there, and they were very much brought undone by, I think it was an actual swing to Howard in that election.
Yes,
and, of course, control of the upper house. But and in that case, you had a lot of people who'd been prominent online who simply gave up, who simply shut the shop and went home.
Was Bob Ellis predicting a win back then too for the True Believers?
That would be interesting. I might go back and have a look at that.
Have a look.
At a guess, I would say yes.
Yes. And a comfortable one.
Yeah, exactly. Latham to control government for 20 years. But you had the opposite happen, of course, when Rudd won in 2007. You had a lot of people saying that on the left, saying that this foretells an era of massive Labor dominance. They pointed out that Labor was in control of just about every state. It was now running federally, and it meant the end of the Liberal Party. And people were saying, were calling on newspapers like the Telegraph and the Australian and various other papers to cleanse their opinion roster of conservative opinion, because it was no longer relevant to the new Labor-led world. It was a whole different paradigm. And no, I've sometimes online I've tossed those comments back at those people and don't like it very much.
No, well, the revolution came so close to fruition, didn't it, I suppose?
Yes, and of course, and it wasn't even us terrible right-wingers who brought down Rudd. It was his own party in the end.
Yes,
So.
funny that. Well, all of this, I guess, channels into the meta-narrative that's been going on throughout this campaign about social media, and particularly Kevin Rudd's adoption of so-called, I call it anti-social media, but let's say social media, the selfies of the shaving cuts up near the eyeball, and all the photos with the school kids who of course can't vote, and all of this. It does seem that, as you point out, this imported Obama campaign strategy stuff may well backfire on them because, of course, unlike in the traditional media where there are laws and rules and defamation suits and all sorts of things like that, in social media it's a bit of a free-for-all, and when the unhinged get typing, it can get awfully messy, can't it?
And not just the unhinged. It can get messy when very hinged people have their say. This has been the story of this week, where we've had, Labor's meant to be running this fantastic social media campaign and getting all the online sort of people behind Rudd. But the big online story of this election, the big social media message of this election, came from a makeup lady in Brisbane.
It did.
No other Facebook post has got as much attention as hers, and it wasn't exactly helpful to Kevin Rudd in his campaign. And it's interesting as well with his selfies. That picture, as you mentioned, with the shaving cut, which an unusually high shaving cut on the face. And
for someone who seems to be terribly clean-skinned, I mean, let's face it, he's not from Greece or something. I mean, you wouldn't assume he has a lot of facial hair happening there.
Well, as a few people pointed out, perhaps there's a touch of the werewolf in Kevin.
Yes.
And that might explain images that were out later in the week when we saw an injury to his to his knuckle. Perhaps that was just another shaving cut.
He might have thumped the wall in the plane when there wasn't an apple or a mango ready or something.
Has anyone ever seen this man after midnight? Does he reflect in a piece of glass?
No, well, he was up terribly early at the markets the other day, but that didn't seem to go too well either. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there might be a touch of the lycanthrope about the Prime Minister. We await. I mean, his concession speech might be a single solitary howl. On the moors.
Yes, we could imagine. Well, he's known as the Narcissus of Nambour, but I don't know, we could maybe come up with something else for Beowulf or something like that.
Well, yes, of course, but again, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves in terms of concession speeches, so I'll correct myself there, because a lot of things can happen in 2 weeks in politics.
Well, yes.
And Lord knows there could be a similar sort of reaction from the right side of politics were Tony Abbott to lose, and a lot of people are already putting Abbott in the victory seat.
Oh yeah, yes.
It's a long way to go, and you wouldn't want to be one of those people who's overconfident and then has their confidence shattered. Remember, a lot of people thought that Barack Obama would lose the last US election, and a lot of pollsters and a lot of pundits had very publicly sort of aligned themselves with the campaign against Barama, and when that didn't turn out, they weren't too happy about it either. So let's just see how it all works out.
Well, there's still about 2 weeks to go. Now, before I let you go, let me just ask you this. We saw after that second so-called debate up in Brisbane, the one where, of course, just beforehand, Kevin wasn't so pleasant to the makeup artist.
Yeah.
We saw straight after that Penny Wong the next morning on ABC News 24 Breakfast come on and have a bit of a soft chat with the hosts there about how Tony's saying, "Does this man ever shut up?" is proof that Tony's really an aggressive kind of guy, aggressive in nature. And then, of course, all the stuff about Kevin and the makeup artist came out and what have you. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know what Tony's like privately or personally, but I've never actually met him. But he seems, anyway, to have been terribly disciplined during this campaign, whereas just more and more evidence actually comes out about real aggression and real sexism and who knows what else from Kevin Rudd.
Well, there was a line the other week from Peter Harcher, the Sydney Morning Herald correspondent, who he was quoting a senior Labor identity, saying that Kevin Rudd has this awesome self-control, and that even after he's had an incredible shouting match, a real Barney with someone in the car, when he gets out of the car and the camera's on him, he smiles and everything's fine. I'm not actually sure that does show a great deal of self-control. I'm not sure that that's actually a positive message that Labor staff was getting out. who the hell shouts at people in a car? This is just routine behaviour for evidence.
Well, only parents with noisy children.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you just drawn the analogy for me.
Yes.
Except that Kevin is the child. It's an extraordinary kind of thing that we've got a Prime Minister who is so prone to tantrums that it's taken for granted by many of his staffers and senior colleagues. Remember that when Rudd made his first challenge against Gillard and the various people who'd previously moved against Rudd explained why they'd done so and told stories of his appalling disrespect towards the cabinet, how he would overrule people, the dysfunction within the government that was led by Rudd. People like, I think Peter Garrett said at one point that if Rudd had won that first challenge, that he wouldn't serve under Rudd, even if Rudd invited him.
Well, Graham Perrott from Brisbane said that if Rudd challenged and won, he would resign. Well, he hasn't done that.
He had all those people lining up to tell horror stories against Rudd. And then, one line from Tony Abbott in a debate is enough to convince Penny Wong that he's this monster. Please, Penny Wong should know better than to draw attention to the temper issues of political leaders.
Well, they're desperate. Well, your final line is the true believers are truly deceived. Do you think that there will be any recompense for them between now and September the 7th?
Well, that's the great thing about faith. It doesn't really matter what happens. You've still got it. These people are modern-day Jobs. They're copying the plague of boils. They're losing their properties. There's fire. There's brimstone.
The Brisbane River's turned to blood.
Exactly. Again, and they're able to. The key though isn't what's happened to them. The key is to maintain the faith, and there will always, I think, be that 25% odd of voters who are in the Labor Church.
Absolutely. Brilliant. I've enjoyed chatting. Thanks so much, Tim Blair. We'll talk again before the campaign's over.
Good on you, Michael. Look forward to it. Thanks, mate.